pictures we can actually look at and compare directly against a suspect item.
Having identified a match between the two samples, there was further compelling evidence to link Marshall to the murder scene.
In addition to finding flock fibres, we found a number of green polyester fibres and green cotton fibres, which were subsequently found to match this green polo shirt, which belonged to Stephen Marshall.
The evidence was overwhelming and placed Stephen Marshall at Geoffrey Howe's flat at the time the body was being dismembered and wrapped up. But while fibre evidence implicated Marshall as the murderer, back in Dundee, Sue Black and her colleague Lucina Hackman were making some startling discoveries about the body parts.
Most dismemberments are unsuccessful or haphazard at best, because most individuals do not appreciate how difficult it is to separate the human body. If you think, right, I'm going to take a leg off, how do you do it? Well, you just cut across the thigh. And you might cut across the tissue, but once you get down to the bone, that bone's really tough. You can't cut through it with a kitchen knife. In most dismemberments, we expect to find those elements that show this person didn't know what they were doing. With the Geoffrey Howe case, we did not find that. So, for example, most of us in the public would find it very difficult to find where that junction is between the lower end of our radius and ulna and the start of our carpal bones, the radiocarpal joint at the wrist. Most of us would make several attempts and wouldn't get it right, and each one of those attempts would be recorded on the bone because you'd have that cut mark left. Marshall found it first time.
The body was dismembered at the joints. There was no cutting of the bone, and that's what takes the time in a dismemberment, is cutting through bone. You need an implement that will actually saw through the very large bones of the lower limbs, for example, and the larger bone of the upper limb. In this case, because the individual went through the joint capsules, all it meant was cutting through soft tissue and cartilage and then separating the body at those spaces. So the dismemberment could have been done in a couple of hours easily by somebody who knew what they were doing.
I've been an anatomist for at least 25 years, I would say, and I've seen quite a number of dismemberment cases. I have never, ever seen anything at this level of skill that I think, if I was given this task, if I had to do this, would I have done this any differently? And the answer is no, I wouldn't have done it any differently. He did it perfectly. And would I have done it any better? No, I couldn't have done it any better. So this is someone who, as an anatomist, I'm looking at an equal in terms of skill. And that's quite chilling.
The forensic team's investigations had raised further questions for the police force.
A line of inquiry was to try and establish whether or not Marshall had any background in knowledge of anatomy, whether he'd previously been a butcher, gamekeeper, something along those lines. But no evidential link was established there.
This left no logical explanation as to how Marshall had acquired these skills, and investigations into his past continued. On the 1st of May 2009, Marshall and Bush appeared in Stevenage Magistrates' Court. They both entered a plea of not guilty, and at the prosecution's request, it was January 2010 before the case went to trial.
Right from the start of the trial, there were surprises. Even before the jury had been sworn in, Marshall had originally pleaded not guilty to everything, but on the first day he changed his plea and he admitted dismembering the body. What he didn't admit to was the murder.
Stephen Marshall and Sarah Bush were being held pending trial for the murder and dismemberment of kitchen salesman Geoffrey Howe in March 2009. The pair had pleaded not guilty at an initial hearing, and a prosecution case was being mounted against them. On January the 12th, 2010, the case was due to begin here at St Albans Crown Court.
Just prior to the court case starting, both Bush and Marshall needed to present us with a defence case statement. During that defence case statement, Bush was claiming that Marshall had carried out the murder, and Marshall was claiming that Bush had carried out the murder.